Hello and welcome to another video. In this video we are going to learn about CSS Flexbox. I have this index.html file in which I have a div with a class name of container, and inside this div I have these 4 divs. Each of these divs have a class name of Flexbox item and also another class name Flexbox item and the number of the div. I have numbered these divs as 1 2 3 4, so the second class name contains that number as well. So inside the styles.css file that I have linked here to this HTML file, I am giving some styles to this Flexbox container. I have given this a position of relative, a border white, you can see a white border around it, a height of 100 viewport height and a width of 100% so that it fills the entire space. And inside this container I have these Flexbox items, and I have given them some common styling using the class Flexbox item that is common to every element in the Flexbox container. I have given them a width of 120 pixel, position relatives at index of 20, a border of white, text color of white, font size of 20 pixels. And apart from that, I have given each separate div some separate stylings that includes the background color. As you can see, they have different colors here, and a minimum height of 100 pixels for now. We'll change that to understand Flexbox concepts. For now I have given them a height of 100 pixel, minimum height of 100 pixels, and I have also created these axes, a vertical axis and horizontal axis. You need not to worry about those axes. This is just for the visualization. So let's see how Flexbox works in CSS. So this is entire container with this white background and a white border and a black background is a container that contains these items. So when I make this a flex container, how I do that in CSS is I set the display property to display of flex. As soon as I save the file, you can see each element is now stretched from top to bottom across the height of this parent container. This is because the default styling of the Flexbox. When we make some container a flex container, the default styling of the flex up to the children of that container. So inside the Flexbox container here we have these Flexbox items. So by default it applies a property of align items. If I write it explicitly, align items to stretch, you can see nothing will change because this is the default property. Align item stretch is the default property. It stretches whatever may be the height of the item, it will stretch across the height of the parent container. Let's say if I change the minimum height to 200 pixel here, 400 pixel here, you can see nothing will happen. If I remove these two lines, let me comment these out and save, you can see now the minimum height applies to the items of the flex container. So let me comment this back in. So if I set this align property to center, you can see now the items inside the flex container are centered. So this is one property, align items. Flexbox also has another property, justify content. If I set this to center as well, now you can see the elements inside this container are centered across this, along this axis as horizontal axis as well as vertical axis as well. Let's change the minimum height to 100 pixels for now. Now you can see the items are centered vertically as well as horizontally. But if you see, if I remove this align items, if I say align items to start, like start, the elements are shifted towards the top of the screen. When I change the value of the property align items, the position of the items inside the container changes along the vertical axis. So by default, when we make a container flex, it arranges the items inside it either in a row or in a column. By default, it arranges them in a row. As you can see, we have not explicitly defined the direction to arrange the elements, but it has arranged them in a row. you can see they are arranged horizontally. That means the flex property arranges the items in a row by default. If I explicitly mention the direction, let's say flex direction of row, you can see nothing happens. So the default direction of a flex container is row. There's a concept of main axis and cross axis in Flexbox in CSS. So let me change to center, so that I can see this vertical axis text. When we set the flex direction of row, to a Flexbox, the main axis for a row is horizontal axis, and the cross axis for the row is vertical axis. So for a flex container with a flex direction of row, the main axis is the horizontal axis and the cross axis is the vertical axis. You have to remember this. But if I change the direction of flex direction to column and save it, you can see the elements are now arranged in a column. But for a column, the main axis is the vertical axis and the cross axis is the horizontal axis. Let me change this back to row. So why is that important? Align items and justify contents of the Flexbox work along these two axes. So the align items works along the cross axis. You have to remember this. Align items works along the cross axis and justify content works along the main axis. So for the row, main axis is the horizontal axis. What do I mean by that? If I change the value of justify content to something else, let's say flex start, you can see the position of these elements was changed along the horizontal axis when I changed the justify. But if I change the align items, let's say flex end, and save it, you can see now the position of the items inside the flex container was changed along the vertical axis. That indicates that the align items properties works along the cross axis and the justify content property works along the main axis. And for a row, the main axis is the horizontal axis and the cross axis is the vertical axis. While for a column, the main axis is the vertical axis and the cross axis is the horizontal axis. So let's see the different values of these two properties, align items and justify content, for both a row direction and a column direction. So let me change the align items property to center. As the align items property works along the cross axis, and these items should be placed here. As for a row, we have specified the direction of row. The main axis is the horizontal axis, cross axis is the vertical axis. Now I'm changing the line items to center, but align items property works along the cross axis. So the position of these items should be changed along this vertical axis, that's the cross axis. So if I save it, you can see the items were placed in the center and were moved along the vertical axis. If I say line items to start, flex start, and save it, you can see the items are now placed at the top of this flex container. So this is how align items property works in case of a row. Let me set this back to center. Now let me change the values of this justify content property and see what the different values do. If I erase this and place a colon here, you can see VS Code is giving us all the suggestions, all the values that the justify content property can take. So the most commonly used justify content values that you'll be using is if you want to place spaces between these items. You can see there is a space between each of the containers. Now you can also change it to space around. Now it will place equal amounts of space. If you see, you can see it has placed a space of 49 pixels. If you measure it from here to the center, you can see 49 pixels. Space around property places equal amounts of space around each container. One may say that the space around this container 1 is larger than the space around container 1. This space that you can see here is the space around the container 1 plus the space around the container 2. That's why it looks like it's more, but it's the space around both sides of the container. So the adjacent containers, the space adds up to twice the amount of space that's around one container. There is another property, you can say space evenly. This places an even amount of space between and around each item inside the Flexbox container. As you can see, the space between 1 and 2 is equal to the space towards the left of 1. The same goes for the column direction. If I change the flex direction to column, as you can see, now the justify property will work along the main axis, as it does as the direction of the Flexbox is changed to column. So the main axis is the vertical axis now, and the horizontal axis is the cross axis. I hope you understood the align items and justify content properties of the Flexbox, both in case of row direction and column direction. There are a few more properties in Flexbox. Let me change this back to row, and let me give these flex items a variable minimum height, let's say 200 pixels, and let's say so. The direction of the flex container here is row, as we have explicitly defined it here. So if you want to align these items along the bottom, so you want this square to be here, and you want the second square to start from here upwards, and this square start from here as well. So how you would do, you want to change the position of these squares along the cross axis. So you want to move it that way, you want to move this that way, you want to move this that way. So in case of row, the property that works on the cross axis is the align property. Now you can see the align items baseline property. It aligned the items inside the flex container. The top of each item inside the flex container, it aligned it towards the top of the flex container. Now this baseline property also has two versions. You can say first baseline, this is the default, and you can say last baseline. It has aligned it towards the bottom end. Now if you want to align the items towards the bottom of the flex container, you can say align items flex end. You can see the items have now been aligned towards the bottom of the container. Let me set this to center. Now if you want some of the items to take the remaining space that is between the containers, you can use the flex grow property, but you cannot use that on the container. You have to use that property on the square that you want to grow. For example, you want square 1 to take the remaining space that is between the containers. You want the square 1 to take that space. You can do that by targeting the square 1 specifically. You can go to this flex item 1, square 1 is, and save it, grow of 1. You can say now it's taking the entire remaining space. We inspect this and shrink it. You can say each of the container is shrinking. It's responding to the window size, and each of the container shrinks as the main container shrinks. If you want to override this default behavior, let's say you want container 2 not to shrink, like shrink of 0, decrease the size of the container again. Every container is shrinking except container 2. So when I decrease the window size, you can see each of the containers is shrinking. And if you don't want any of the containers to shrink, instead you want to go them to the next line, you can do that by using another flex property called flex wrap. You save it and you have to override the default shrink property. By default, shrink is set to flex shrink is set to 1. You have to explicitly set it to 0 so that no container shrinks as the window size decreases. So if you close the container, you can see the items are wrapping down to the next line. So this is another fun property that Flexbox has. That's all about Flexbox in CSS. I hope you like the video. Thank you.